Hello and welcome to the latest ATA webinar. Today's webinar is on the positive impact of tourism and conservation in communities as Zimbabwe reopens, and a big thank you to African Bush Camps for pulling this team of panelists together. Today we've got 5 presentations from across Zimbabwe who will each be doing a short presentation, and this will be followed by an update of the latest COVID protocols before we head to Q&A. So introducing our panelists, today we're joined by Luke Brown, co-owner of Vayeni, who are destination-based experts of safari journeys in Africa. Shane White, Chief Marketing Officer of Wild Horizons, which was grown from a small family-run safari business founded in 1987 to one of Zimbabwe's leading tourism operations. Kirstine Vercoe, UK-based account manager for African Bush Camps, who has pulled this wonderful panel together today. Sharon Stead, CEO of Amalinda's Safari Collection, a 30-year-old family-owned safari operation with camps on the Matobo Hills and Vayeni National Park. And finally, Howard Russell, co-owner and director of Chilo Gorge Safari Lodge, which offers safari travelers the ability to explore the little gem and wilderness of a wilderness area, which is Gonorrhoea. So welcome to our panel. As always, this webinar is recorded and the recording will be distributed to everyone who has registered. If you've got any questions, please type these into the Q&A box and we will address them at the end of the session. So thank you all for taking the time to join us today, and I'm sure it'll be a great session. And I'd now like to hand over to Luke, who'll be kicking off with the presentation. Luke, over to you.
Right, thank you very much indeed, Chris, and thanks to everybody for joining in today's webinar. I'm going to be talking to you initially about the Zambezia Conservation Alliance, and then a little bit later about Zimbabwe's current situation with regards to reopening. So kicking off with the Zambezia Conservation Alliance, in April this year, we formed the Zambezia Conservation Alliance, or ZCA. Zambezia is a pre-colonial term referring to a region that surrounds the Zambezi River, a broad area stretching across 7 countries from the western to the eastern part of middle southern Africa. ZCA was founded by myself, my brother Robin, who runs an incentive company called CanSAF in Victoria Falls, and my wife Suzanne, who's also my partner in Vayeni. As with many tourism players in Africa, we have supported conservation efforts for some time with a percentage of revenue contributed on lots of the individual itineraries that we have sold. In March 2020 of this year, tourism basically ground to a halt, as we all know, but the result being an immediate loss of funding to genuine frontline conservation outfits. As much as 90% of funding to some of these outfits was lost. We quickly realized that with some newfound time on our hands, together with a little bit of creativity, we could play a positive role in our way in this situation. We're not frontline conservationists ourselves, and we're not out in the field removing snares or tracking down poachers. But our main mission with ZCA is to create significant awareness for the players at the coalface that are making significant strides in conservation. We initiated 2 broad movements, We Share Africa and Sport for Conservation, through which to facilitate an approach that allows anyone to get involved on a level in conservation. And through awareness, we generate support that comes in kind and funding for partners who form part of. Our biggest foot forward since we launched the ZCA was the first series of the Conservation Games. This beautiful picture was donated to the ZCA cause by an artist called Cole Sterling. He was born in Zimbabwe, but he's based in the UK. And he was inspired to do this after watching his childhood sporting heroes in the Conservation Games. Cole asked us if he could do this pangolin piece because the animal is the logo of the games, And no doubt this incredible art piece joins the prestigious trophy currently under construction by Patrick Mavros, a renowned silversmith based out of Harare. And it will no doubt add passion to the cause. Next slide, please. The first series of the Conservation Games brought together more than 70 sports professionals in virtual head-to-head encounters online that involved quiz-style questions about their careers and conservation, plus a very entertaining, wacky, wild section where players were forced to literally embarrass themselves by reenacting actions like a rhino run and charge or a fish eagle swoop and call. Many of the players indicated that this was the most nervous time they'd had, given the fact that we had coaches of Springboks and 4 former Springbok captains of Zimbabwe cricket, all doing this. The games went on for a month, and in between game time, the players interacted with a different conservation coach every week. We sourced conservation experts from Zimbabwe and surrounding countries to take the players through some of the complexities of conservation. The idea was to harness the power of sports celebrities to become conservation champions, influencing their audience positively around the issues of this massively important topic. And importantly also, to make conservation something cool. The output following the Conservation Games has been extremely rewarding, as we have supported some incredible Victoria Falls and Bloomy Hills anti-poaching units, among others, are often unsung heroes that day in, day out make a difference on the ground. And the story of Rocky the baby rhino from Savi Valley Conservancy has touched many people's hearts. And we've been thrilled to play a role in securing his future. Next slide, please. Through our Conservation Active initiative that allows anyone to take part, we have supported many great efforts over the last few months. We were also appointed a Zimbabwean ambassador by Tusk for the Ride for Rangers and Wildlife Ranger Challenge initiatives that have raised literally millions of dollars of revenue for rangers across Africa that are fighting illegal trafficking and the trade of wildlife products. Our efforts are based in Zambezia and we generate support locally, but we have now managed to pull together a board of trustees in the USA as we finalize our incorporation there as a charity, and we are finalizing the same in the UK. As a fully registered conservation charities in these markets, we hope to continue to grow our impact and reach funding that is effectively and efficiently sent out into the field to the deserving players. Next slide, please. At Vayeni, we've recently created In Search of the Great Seven, which is a bucket list adventure that includes seeing the big 5 plus gorillas and emperor penguins in Antarctica. We've partnered with some of the finest supply Africa for possible between destinations, and it's aimed at very high net worth individuals. But importantly, sees that they have an impact on conservation that is both measurable and tangible. And all the profits that Vayeni make will be given directly to conservation through ZCA. Aside from this high-list trip, Vayeni now pledges an additional percentage of money is generated through the sale of any itinerary we design over and above what we are giving to conservation before COVID-19 during this period. It's been a fantastic opportunity for us to get involved. Please, can I have the next slide? Thank you so much for learning about ZCA, and we'd be delighted to engage with you further. I'd like to hand over now to Shane from Wild Horizons, whom we're excited to support both in tourism and conservation because of the amazing work they do in these areas themselves. Thank you.
Luke, thanks for that. And thanks to you and Rob for the efforts that you put into for conservation in Zimbabwe and the surrounds. Thanks to African Bush Camps for giving me the opportunity to join the presentation today. And of course, thanks to all of you for listening in. Absolutely, the opening up of tourism will have a huge impact on the communities and conservation. Big Falls is 100% tourism dependent. We have no other industry to fall on. So when tourists stopped traveling in March of 2020, our little town basically shut down. Our communities and our conservation efforts have really come under immense strain because of this. Of course, we have all done our utmost to support the communities and to maintain our conservation efforts over this time. However, with zero income, this is extremely difficult. And we now have a glimmer of hope with Zimbabwe opening up. International arrivals, the first plane arrived on the 6th of October, I think it was, and domestic tourism opened up in September. So although tourist arrivals remain at a mere trickle, in fact, maybe not even a trickle, a drop at a time, we are at least open and ready. And the arrivals of these tourists and even the locals traveling around Zimbabwe gives us the opportunity to support the communities once again and increase our conservation efforts. Our presentation time is quite limited, so I'd like to give you a quick overview on what Wild Horizons does for communities and conservation and how your guests can get involved. So, Kirstine, could I ask you to the next slide, please? Okay, the foundation of Wild Horizons community and conservation efforts is the Vic Falls Wildlife Trust. Okay, founded in 2008, the trust was initially called Wild Horizons Wildlife Trust, but as it grew, we felt the need to bring on other members of the Vic Falls community, other companies on board to sit on the exco and help us grow the trust and support conservation and communities. And we changed it to the Vic Falls Wildlife Trust so it was more all-encompassing. The trust is located on 4,000 acres of land that Wild Horizons leases from national parks. We're in the Victoria Falls National Park, and it's the property on which the elephant camp is built. So how do our guests get involved in the trust? All of the guests staying at Elephant Camp, staying at Old Drift Lodge, or staying at the new Wallow, yet to be open, but will be post-COVID, the new Wallow Lodge, are welcome to visit the trust. We encourage them to visit the trust, meet the vets, see what the lab technicians are up to, go into the rehabilitation site, and learn more about our conservation and our community efforts. And hopefully they'll put their hands in their pockets and contribute to these efforts. Thanks, Kirstine. We can go to the next slide. Okay, there's three key areas to the trust. We are the only wildlife or dedicated veterinary wildlife clinic in the entire Khaza region. Okay, the Khaza region is a conservation area of 500,000 or just over 500,000 square kilometers. Okay, we employ full-time vets who rescue, rehabilitate with the ultimate goal of releasing wildlife that has been injured or orphaned due to human interference. This is generally snaring, but we're seeing, unfortunately, an increased incident in poisoning. And yeah, so this year alone, we have removed snares from 30 animals, which is double of what we did last year over the same period. And that's just an indicator of the tough economic times that the people are living in. And this is having a direct impact on conservation and the environment. We can go to the next slide, thanks. The second key area is our wildlife research and community outreach. The Vic Falls Wildlife Laboratory, which is attached to the clinic, again, is the only wildlife disease and forensic laboratory in the Khaza region. A good example of the work that we do, but not limited to this, is I'm sure you all heard about the elephants that died in great numbers in Botswana earlier in the year, between 350 and 400 elephants that died around waterholes. Our laboratory was called in to help identifying the cause of these deaths, which ultimately came down to a toxic algae that grew under certain conditions in waterholes. But that just gives you an example of the type of work that we do. It's not limited to Vic Falls. We work in entire Zimbabwe and the surrounding countries. Part of our community work that we do, we work very closely with national parks. And one of the projects is sustaining and supporting the national parks rangers and their families. We have funding to provide each ranger and his family with a ration pack for the next 5 months. So we effectively are helping to feed more than 300 people each month. Another part of our project is finding sustainable solutions for communities and wildlife to coexist. And this is a massive project. This is so important that the communities and wildlife coexist. Victoria Falls is built, well, the falls is not built, but the town is within a national park, Zambezi National Park and Victoria Falls National Park, which are both surrounded by community areas. Okay, there's free movement of wildlife between the national parks and the community farming areas. Okay, one of the projects that we work on is with Oxford University Wild Crew, is a Lion Guardian project. And what we do here is we take individual animals within a pride of lions in the national park, and we put a satellite tracking device on them. We are then able to satellite track those lions or that pride on a daily basis. When we see the lions moving out of the national park, which is more often is the case in the green season when hunting becomes difficult in the park, the lions will move into the community areas and start hunting the livestock. We send the lion guardians into the community areas to advise the villagers that lions are leaving the park, they're coming into the community, you need to be aware. We have mobile lion-proof bomas that we erect, and we move the cattle, the villagers' cattle into the bomas overnight where they're protected from the lions. And if possible, we find the lions and drive them back into the national park. Like I say, this project is funded and founded by Oxford University, and the success of this has been immense. The reduction, it is 60% reduction in the offtake of livestock since this project was incepted. So, I mean, it's incredibly successful. Thanks, Kirstine. If you can go to the next one. We all know that education is so important. Grassroots conservation, education, and empowerment. So once a week, Wild Horizons will send a bus out into the community areas. We will collect a classroom of children. We will bring them back to the trust, where they will spend a day learning about conservation, learning how wildlife and communities can coexist. They will spend time with the vets. They will spend time in the laboratory with the lab technicians. And obviously, if there's animals in the rehab center, they will spend time at the rehab center learning more about the animals that are being treated. Annually, we host over 1,000 children who come and spend a day with us. And running parallel to this, we have an award scholarship program where we select kids who have visited the trust, and we undertake to pay the schooling for the rest of their lives. We are currently paying for the school fees of 132 children. We will continue to do this as long as we possibly can. But again, obviously, coffers are running dry, and the impact of COVID is immense on us. So for Zim to be open again and tourism to be picking up again will play a big part in us being able to maintain to do this and to grow the number of children that we look after. Kirstine, can we go to the next slide? Thank you. Yeah, so as I said, it's a very quick overview of what we do. Our efforts are not limited to the trust. We have a number of other community support programs, including the Rainforest Raincoat Project, where we buy raincoats, we donate them to a cooperative at the entrance to the rainforest. Every guest that we take to the on a tour of the falls, we then hire back a raincoat from the cooperative and supply it to our guests. The only thing we ask is that the cooperative, when they're given back, wash, disinfect them, dry them, and have them ready again for the next day. So we, in a normal year, a good year, we'll conduct well over 100,000 tour of the falls in the year. So it's a meaningful contribution we're making to that cooperative. Pay It Forward is another program that guests can get involved in, probably our home-hosted meals, village tours. These are all products that Wild Horizons offer that involve community and conservation that guests can book and partake in, and ultimately the funds generated from these tours will go back to the communities. If you'd like to know a little bit more about these programs in detail, please get hold of me. I'll put my email address up on the chat if you don't have it, or feel free to ask questions after the presentations. Thank you very much, and thanks once again to all of you for joining and for your support. And Kirstine, I'd like to pass on to you.
Hi, Shane. Thanks for that. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with our brand and the camps of African bush camps, but we are much more than just a portfolio of properties. In fact, we actually see our purpose as sharing and conserving Africa together, be that with you, our trade partners, or our guests that come and stay, or our fellow safari operators. And in this time, I'll be just sharing a little bit of what it is that ABC does to support conservation and communities, and how your guest, or client at least, plays a vital role in sharing that together with us. ABC obviously has three main areas of operation within Zimbabwe: Wangi, Lake Kariba, and Mana Pools. And guests staying with us in our camps at any of those locations are obviously contributing to our efforts in conservation and community. So looking firstly at our conservation efforts, We strive to achieve harmony between communities and the wildlife in order that we can preserve the natural landscapes and ecosystems. Now, a lot of that is done through mitigating human-wildlife conflict through things like those cattle boma initiatives and lion guardian programs. We also obviously support national parks through ranger support initiatives. And within the communities, our guides play a really vital role in terms of participating with communities through school conservation programs, educating them on the importance of conservation, and more often than not, inspiring many of these youngsters to follow a career in guiding and conservation. Finally, of course, looking at our own safari operations, we try and ensure that our camps are built as sustainably as possible, using things like solar power and, of course, water and waste management systems so that we have as little impact on the land as possible. Moving across to our community involvement, the work of the African Bush Camps Foundation focuses very much on education, infrastructure development, and of course, income generation projects. Now, there are far too many projects to go into individually, but what I would like to stress is that, of course, the projects themselves are specific to the needs of the individual communities that we're working with. So some of our recent achievements have been the development of ECD facilities at Main Camp Primary in Wangi, to the building of a second classroom at our Mangwara Primary School near Bumi Hills, to things like supporting the Mambanji community gardens, where the local community have a protected environment where they're able to grow their crops and that they're free from roaming wildlife and cattle. Of course, in July, with the influence of COVID, we set up the COVID-19 response program, and we have been able to distribute a lot of supplies to rural clinics and in the communities we work with. And in fact, at the moment, we are busy with something called the Tippy Tap installation. Tippy Taps being those no-touching hand washing systems. And we're ensuring that we can distribute those to about 1,000 households who don't have access to running water, thereby, of course, ensuring improved hygiene and obviously reducing the risk of transmission within these rural communities. Now, you may very well be wondering how your actual client plays a role in achieving these causes with us. And so I think if there's one thing I can really stress, it's that by simply being a guest in one of our camps, they are actually making a valuable contribution to these causes. As part of a booking with us, a guest pays a conservation levy to the Conservation Wildlife Fund, which aims at enabling or ensuring that the wildlife and habitats of the Wangi area are protected. We also include a community donation in our safari bookings, and this goes directly to supporting the work of the foundation. I think COVID and the pandemic and impact it had on travel has really highlighted the very important role that visitors to the safari world play in generating funds for us to use as operators on the ground. And so African Bush Camps have something called the Foundation Contribution. And this is a fund which is equivalent to 2.5% of every client's entire booking value. And that money is set aside exclusively for the use by the foundation to achieve these conservation and community projects. Now, for some guests, that may be sufficient, knowing that they're obviously making a positive impact locally. But for those guests who are obviously looking for a slightly more immersive and more meaningful experience on the ground, we would really encourage them to kind of get involved in our community visits. And within a Zimbabwe context, these are best done from our camps at Samalisa and Bumi Hills, purely because of their relative proximity to the communities which they support. So looking at Samalisa, Wangi Main Camp is easily accessible as part of a traditional game drive activity, and there they can see the work that's being done within the community. But for those who maybe are looking for something a little bit more in depth, we would really encourage them to set aside a full day of their time at Samalisa and then do a full day's activity out to the Mambanji village, where again, they'll get to see some of the work that's going on there and meet the community and see how they're benefiting from the impact. Moving over to Vayeni Hills, of course, this is another great opportunity for that level of community engagement. A lot of our staff at Vayeni Hills actually live in the Molok village, which is next door to us. And they are therefore able to take an activity, be a half-day excursion into the village where they will meet with members of the community, see the work that's going on the ground, and really feel that they are seeing the impact of the work and visit that they're having to these areas. So I've kept it really brief, but if you would like to learn a little bit more about our African Bush Camps Foundation or more details about the individual projects, please visit our dedicated website. There you can sign up to our newsletters and our social media, and also, of course, make a donation should you feel you would like to support the work that we do. Thank you for your time today. I'm now going to hand you over to Sharon Stead from the Amalinda collection.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Kirstine. It's great to be here with you all. I feel very honored that I'm up here with some of the giants of our industry in Zimbabwe. So my discussion today is mainly about the fact that we have turned 30 years old and our work that we've wanted to do and have been doing behind the scenes was going to be celebrated this year in our 30 for 30 campaign with the Mother Africa Trust. And Mother Africa Trust was founded by myself and my other directors in my company, and we have been working since 2002. So if I can have the next slide, Kirstine, thank you. Basically, what we have also tried to do is incorporate our guests' experience to be involved with Mother Africa Trust and the projects that we work with. And this can be done, the next few slides I'm going to be showing you are on specifically Vayeni. But we take you out to certain activities, and that could be walking with our rangers, our scouts, doing patrols. And on this specific slide, you'll see that you know, every single activity that we do with the rangers is logged onto our smart devices. Our boundary is with the Mabali community, and so we act as a form of a buffer from the community. Then they come onto our concession in Vayeni, which is a 6,000 acre concession, and then from there we border the national park. So as that buffer, we need to do a lot of protection of those incursions. And it's also important to know that as an NGO APU, it's good to know what's happening on the ground. So we don't just go out and do random like walking and just patrols. We need to know where the grass is, where the water is, because where that ecology is, the animals will be. So don't just walk into an area where there's no animals because there's no grass and there's no seasonal water. So that's important to also start working with as an APU. And when we're doing our patrols, you know, that information and that intelligence is good. And because not every person out there is a poacher. Some do it out of necessity, and some people will do it as more of a criminal activity. So those people who would do it for like animal trinkets. So the work that we do and having you guys with us, I'm just going to bring up the next slide. Can we have the next slide? Thanks. Has been pretty intensive this year, even through COVID. So on this slide, you'll see we did a big collaborative on the ground with other operators in the area in Vayeni, but this was the removal of all the telephone wire that had fallen down over the years from Tel 1. And we got together and got permission to remove this wire. It's a copper-coated wire. It's really, really strong and has been used a lot for poaching and poaching activities. Here in the slide, you can see that the telephone line has fallen down, and this poor kudu has actually been snared by himself, and I've seen many animals like this where they actually just get caught up in this wire. So not all of the wire has been removed to be used for snaring, but these animals have been caught up in this wire. So we removed over 40 kilometers of this wire down the boundary of Vayeni National Park. And these are the sort of activities that you can get involved in. So the next one, please, Kirsten. We also sponsor some of the dangerous drugs for darting animals. So when we see animals with snares, they need the M99 to be darted, and also to remove these snares. So on this one slide, this one elephant, we're trying to remove a snare. We also get involved with taking samples, and these samples go up to Vic Falls to get tested on, specifically this year with the elephants that have died. They needed to take samples up to certain areas to get those identified. The next one, thanks. So on the next slide, what we are involved in, and I know Kirstine and Shane have spoken about this, but human wildlife mitigation, because we're on the boundary of the Mabali community, is quite a big issue. The livestock gets pushed onto our concession, and then they get fed there, and then at night they get herded off back into the community, and they get housed in these really poorly constructed kraals. And at night, of course, the lions and the other predators have smelt these domestic animals out, and they go across the road and they attack the domestic animals. And of course, this upsets the villagers, and they want to now shoot the lions because they're seen as vermin. So what we have done, and not with the mobile bomas, but with the more permanent bomas, we have constructed 16 bomas to date, and 5 of those have been actually this year through the COVID era. And these are predator-proof bomas. So eventually, you know, the villagers can sleep at night, and they're not antagonistic towards wildlife. And so it's helping bridge that gap between tourism and living with wildlife in the communities. And that's what our volunteers through Mother African Trust can also get involved in. Okay, moving on from Vayeni, the next slide, thanks Kirsten, is the work that we do in Matoba Hills as well, alongside our lodge Amalinda. And it's known that southern Matabeleland has been in a very severe drought this year. And this has impacted on a lot of the wildlife in Matopus, who generally live off the water sources that come through the riverines and the pans, but these have dried up this year. So together with Matopus Rhino Trust, we have been working in building these little water seeps for the animals to drink out of. And you can see, of course, Matopus is famous for rhinos, and it's really important that we keep the rhinos in the park and that they're not allowed to venture out of the park through, you know, broken fences and whatever, and to venture into other areas looking for water. So it's been fantastic that we're seeing other game using these little sipping ponds, and they've been created so that animals can easily get in and out, and they're not, they're more like wallows. Thanks, next slide. This year, we've also embarked on a massive drought relief feeding program. We have fed the forestry scouts in Vayeni National Park a ton of maize. And this has been dropped off in 2 batches to those forestry scouts, which will obviously also feed their families. This enables them to actually get out and have the energy to get out and work. As you can imagine, they're covering massive distances, and with our COVID problems these days, you know, money is short, and so the scouts were suffering. And so we went forward and fed them a ton of maize. We've also embarked on another feeding program, both in Vayeni and in Matopus. And we are feeding 75 families through different wards in that area in Matopus. And you can see in this slide all the social distancing of what that food package and parcel is going to look like. And excuse me. And and every month they come and collect their food rations. So that's been a massive support, and also want to thank our donors for helping in that way. Okay, next slide, Kirstine. Here, this photograph was specifically to show you how magnificent my dad's physique is. Without his shirt on, and this is a typical picture of him at 77 years old. He's one of our trustees at Mother Africa, and he is here assisting in the building of the Magadla Primary School in Matopus. The school we have built from foundation level. Of course, you can't build a school without water, so together with the Mpilo Foundation, we were able to sink a borehole and start building the school. So funds permitting, we hope to finish the school early into next year. I know it looks way off it, but there's been massive progress. Okay, next slide. Another thing that we love doing is supporting sustainable, uplifting programs with the communities. The community people are farmers. They love to farm, whether it's going to be growing crops or growing chickens, or, you know, we can also work with the Gift of the Goat project, where we gift a goat to a family, and then they breed those goats, and then they gift a little kid to the next family, and so that, you know, starts to grow those projects. But here, if you are supporting them in growing their own food, they can then sell that food to the rest of the community, and hence start making money for themselves. We also support the Etendweni Children's Home in Matoba Hills, as well as the old age home, the Dete Old Age Home in Dete. So here's a few pictures of that. And then I'm just going to finish off my last slide, which is a wonderful activity that we offer, where you can actually venture into the communities of Matopus, and you'll see these are the sort of homesteads that are built in Matopus, beautifully decorated by these clays that often they travel long distances to try and find the different colors of clays. And every year when the rains come, those clays get washed off, and they start another year of painting their homes. And there's a great initiative called My Beautiful Home, and it's a competition where we gift these homes to enable them to have, like, continue their tradition of actually painting their homes in the traditional way. What we do, we like to go in on bicycle, because it eliminates and alleviates the footprint in these areas. They're great 12 to 24 kilometer cycles that you can go through and visit all these different homes, and our guests identify with those people that they're meeting, and from there on, through the Mother Africa Trust, they are supporting these homes and these families. So that's a great way of connecting and using tourism to support communities. I haven't left my details here, but I will put them in the chat if you have any more questions. I'm sure most of you watching here know us, and I'll pass on now to Howard from Chilo, and thank you for the time today.
Hi all, thanks Shaz. So we're now going to take you briefly down to the southeast of Zimbabwe and just talk for a couple of minutes about Gonorrhea and also the Mahenya community. Next page. So in terms of where Chilo sort of fits into the broader story of both Gonorrhea and the Mahenya community, then really it all begins with my co-owner and co-director, who is a man called Clive Stockhill, who some of you will have met, some of you will have heard of, and for those that you haven't, will hopefully get on your list. He founded the very first campfire project roughly about 40 years ago with the Mahenya community and Gonorrhea National Park. The ethos of which when I say it now sounds sort of very obvious, but at the time was pretty groundbreaking, is if you want the wildlife to benefit, you need to have community-led conservation. So if the community benefit from the wildlife, then the wildlife will benefit too. And so Chilo Gorge actually was built in order to make his campfire project sustainable, in order to bring real economic benefit into the local community. And for his work in conservation, Clive has won various international awards, including the Tusk Award from Prince William in the UK and awards from the Chicago Zoological Society, etc. Next slide. So the Campfire Committee basically are a group of representatives elected on an annual basis by the community. And their role is to effectively apportion and sort of consider which projects will get funded for that year or for that season within the Mahenya community. As you'd anticipate, things that have been done recently include building nutrition gardens, together with the funding for the water pumps, for the fencing that goes with that, medical support for the clinic, improvements to a number of the school buildings, bursaries and scholarships, as well as funding for orphans. And the money that comes into the Campfire Committee is effectively raised through community levy that we charge guests of Chilo. So whether guests are staying with us in the main lodge or in any of our tented camps, each night they will pay a community levy fee, and that money then gets transferred to the Campfire Committee for them to basically put to the projects that they think are the highest priorities at any given time. Next slide, please. So the Mahenya Charitable Trust sits alongside and works in very close coordination with the Campfire Committee. The Mahenya Charitable Trust is a charity set up by the directors of Chilo Gorge. And we effectively use it as a vehicle for raising donations and funding from our guests, or indeed from any other donors who are interested to contribute. Ultimately, the funding within MCT is used by both MCT and Campfire to help finance their projects. And through 2020, MCT has effectively become pretty much the lifeblood of the sort of Campfire Committee and the Campfire projects. As you can anticipate, obviously, with international tourism revenues dropping off almost entirely, then there has been a very big shortfall in terms of what we would normally expect to be coming into Campfire. And so this has meant that MCT, which thankfully had a relatively healthy balance going into this crisis, has been able to continue to fund projects, the most important of which this year has been increasing the food aid into the broader community. And one thing that perhaps has become even more apparent to us as we went through this very difficult year is just how far-reaching the impact of Campfire has been within the local community. And so we now understand that either directly or indirectly, through either the salaries of the staff or the work of Campfire or the donation from MCT, that we touch approximately 5,000 local villagers or people in the local community. And so the donations that have been accumulating over the last few years have effectively ensured that in this very arid area of Zimbabwe, in this very poor region of Zimbabwe, there has been enough food to keep the communities running, and also to ensure that we don't see a return to poaching or sort of living off the wildlife that traditionally has been sort of a custom practice. Next slide, please. The other thing that I think for us is a very exciting part of sort of what Gonorrhea has to offer is that the Gonorrhea Conservation Trust, which is effectively a partnership between the Frankfurt Zoological Society and the Zimbabwe Parks, is a very new co-management model and is working, I would say, incredibly well. And what we're excited about is not just the work that is being done in terms of the infrastructure, the anti-poaching, the security of the park, but also their tourism development plan. But what we also feel very excited about is because of the way that the Conservation Trust is run, we know that every single dollar of national park fees that we raise from our guests, which we give to the Conservation Trust, goes back into that park. And so from the perspective of making sure that monies raised from our travelers, from our guests, go either directly into the community levy and directly into the Campfire projects, which we actively oversee, or go directly into the park itself, we feel very confident that money spent, and indeed any additional donations on top of that, go exactly to where they should be going. Next slide, please. So Clive has developed this concept of campfire 40 years ago. He is currently working on his next conservation initiative with the local community. It is a bit of a tongue twister. It's a public-private community partnership, of which Chilo is the private partner and the community is obviously Mahenya, with the EU helping to fund a good portion of this. It is the first conservancy within Zimbabwe and perhaps in more broader Southern Africa, where a local community have decided to convert the land use from cattle grazing into wildlife conservancy. So this is the latest project. Again, we are currently raising donations and funds from our visitors, past and future visitors, in order to help fund this. So that it will be open in 2021. And the slide that you can see here is elephants crossing from the left-hand bank, which is where the Jamanda Conservancy is, back into Gonraju National Park. So it is completely open to the park for wildlife to move back and forth. And I think that's where I'll leave it now, because I'm mindful that Luke has a few more pages that he needs to talk about with regard to travel. So any questions we'll be delighted to field at the end.
Much, Howard, and everybody else that spoke. Some incredible things happening there. Right. I'm excited now to have the chance to talk to you all about the latest progress in our home country as we continue to adapt and open up as a destination. Please note that the situation remains fluid, and thus what I talk about now will evolve and change in the coming days and weeks ahead. I've tried to keep this portion of the presentation short and to the point, allowing for plenty of interaction in the question and answer session to follow, and where I will no doubt get some very valuable support from my colleagues. Next slide, please. Zimbabwe followed South Africa into a full lockdown scenario in late March of this year, and we faced similar restrictions in this scenario to most countries, with our airports and borders being shut down, mandatory quarantines and curfews enforced, and generally lots of time at home with which to contemplate the situation. This slide gives you some understanding of the timeline and history that has led up to the current day. The Zimbabwean tourism industry has not been spared the devastating economic effects that this pandemic has brought. But challenges from our past, as well as a positive and predictably resourceful, being Zimbabwean, we believe we are pretty resourceful, approach has all meant that people have continued to overcome multiple hurdles. According to the latest statistics, Zimbabwe has had 8,215 COVID-19 cases to date, with 236 deaths. By all respects, this is an extremely low record in comparison to many other countries. On the 1st of October, our airports reopened to international traffic. Next slide, please. International airports have opened and are receiving flights. Emirates, Ethiopian, and Rwanda Air are all flying into Harare multiple times per week. Airlink, who seem to be rocketing ahead quickly to be the dominant regional player, are servicing flights between Johannesburg as well as Harare and Bulawayo. FastJet were also quick to get back in the skies, and these routes have also been quick to get back into the skies on these routes, and have just announced also that they'll be flying the Victoria Falls Johannesburg route from as early as December, with British Airways Comair announcing a similar timing. Kenyan Airways return on the Nairobi, Victoria Falls, Cape Town routing from December. So in just over a month away, we're expecting the Falls skies to really open up again internationally, whilst FastJet and Air Zimbabwe continue to ply the usual domestic routes, Vic Falls, Harare, and Bulawayo. Importantly, at this time, Zimbabwe's land borders remain closed for tourists However, we do anticipate that this may change in the not too distant future. Next slide, please. Spend a little bit of time here. There is no mandatory quarantine on arrival in Zimbabwe, as long as one arrives with a COVID-19 negative certificate that is valid 48 hours prior to arrival in the country. We're currently trying to lobby to increase that timing, as we're all too aware that it does seem possibly a little bit short. However, it is necessary to present with a completed traveler surveillance form. This is an easy to fill out form that will be issued either on the plane or on arrival at the airport. And it basically just requires the traveler to answer and sign off on basic questions about their symptoms and travel history. And this is submitted together with a negative certificate at a screening counter between the aircraft and the immigration booths. At this health screening station, travelers will be checked for symptoms. Obvious things like temperature, fever, cough, etc. will be checked. And only where symptoms are presented will the affected person be isolated for further testing. Zimbabwe's airports have announced, together with Lancet Laboratories, that PCR testing can now be undertaken at the major airports. In addition to this, selected clinics or hospitals in the towns have dedicated PCR machines. Results of these tests can be obtained between 2 and 24 hours. Tests cost in the order of $60 to $100. On departure from Zimbabwe, PCR tests will likely be required from most travelers, as their home countries and also airlines now require returning citizens to have a COVID-19 negative certificate when they go home. Now, having said all that, please be rest assured that obviously by engaging with the right partners on the ground, you'll be assisted at every single step throughout this process, both prior and during travel. We've all been living here right throughout this period. We've got very low incidence rates, and actually, as tricky as some of this tends to look sometimes, we can get you through it pretty efficiently and smoothly. Your local partners will have the latest local knowledge, best experience, and the right contacts to make the whole process smoother and efficient. Should someone need to be isolated, or should they become critically ill, there are logical and safe steps that will be followed depending on the individual cases. No one will be left to fend for themselves, and you have plenty of friends in this destination. Next slide, please. Zimbabwe has such a low rate of COVID-19 infection, and along with most of Africa, it would appear after months of this pandemic that the country consistently remains one of the safest destinations to travel to. Just this week, an ex-NATO and security expert working for Torlane, travel experts based in the USA, gave Zimbabwe the #1 spot on a list of the safest places to travel. This announcement is based on real facts and statistics, and I encourage you to follow the link in this slide and read more about it. Emirates and Ethiopian Airlines have both cleverly introduced COVID-19 travel insurances that cover their passengers for the duration of their travels, which offers an additional peace of mind. In Zimbabwe, we have some of the best safari camps and lodges in Africa. Of that, there is no doubt. They are small, boutique, and exclusively set within truly wild and open space full of fresh air. They are managed by incredible staff who have prepared meticulously for the return of guests. New safety protocols are in place, but these, to be very honest, have an extremely low impact on guest comfort. In fact, I would confidently say that in most cases, the new measures have positively outweighed the old. For example, privacy. exclusivity, both in camp and on safari activities, have increased. Terms and conditions have been relaxed, amongst many other things, apart from that warm Zimbabwean hospitality that will just make people comfortable the moment they arrive. Zimbabwe remains an incredibly diverse destination, safe, friendly, competitive, and it is easily a destination in its own right. Last slide, please. So thank you very much for listening to that. And following this presentation, we're looking forward to hearing some of your questions. Please remember that the situation continues to evolve in a positive way here on the ground. And I'd like to hand over back to Chris for the open forum.
Great, thank you everybody. Thank you Kirstine for controlling the slides, and thank you to everyone for their presentations. As we said at the beginning, if anyone does have any questions, please type the questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and I'll be addressing those to the panel. So it's fantastic to see something that we all know, and that is how closely tourism, the communities and conservation are interconnected. So thank you all for fantastic presentations. So all very useful. If our presenters would like to turn their cameras back on so the audience can see them all, that would be great. Luke, I'll pose this question to you from Jack Johnson. Can people from the US visit Zimbabwe currently?
Yes, they can. They absolutely can. No reason for them not to, as long as they follow the procedures that we presented. There's no reason for them not to get here. The one thing that I just want to point out, and I pointed it right out at the beginning of the presentation, is there is a fairly short lead time in terms of getting the COVID certificate. So it really needs to be borne into mind that that is up until the time of arrival. So, you know, leave that PCR test. If you're coming from the States, leave that right till the end, and try to find a doctor that will give it to you quickly.
Yeah, that's a tight turnaround time. Maybe it's an opportunity to have a stop off in another African destination on the way, and get your PCR tests on the way down to Zimbabwe. A question, Shane, I'm going to address this one to you from Sue. Do you know the total number of people that are currently that are employed in the tourism industry in Zimbabwe? I won't say currently, I would say pre-COVID.
Wow, honest answer, no. Any of the other panelists are willing to chip in here? But no, Sue, sorry, I don't have an answer for you on how many people are employed in the tourism industry in the country.
Sharon, from a TBCZ point of view, do you have that stat or an estimate on it?
You've put me on the spot. I do know that there's probably a good 35,000 people in Victoria Falls, and probably 90% of them are involved in tourism, but that's just Victoria Falls. So yeah, I wish I did know that answer, and I will find out for you though.
Cool, thank you.
I mean, I don't know the answer, but I mean, I've seen stats that talk about 20 to 25% being directly involved in tourism. To my mind, I think that, however, materially underestimates the indirect impact that, you know, it has down through, you know, the families, the sort of the wider family groups. So whatever the number is, you know, whatever the percentage is, the reality is that on the ground around these places, I mean, the impact is enormous.
Yeah, totally.
So important to note there, Chris, that tourism in Zimbabwe brings in excess of 10% of GDP.
Yeah.
So that should also give some indication.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely vital. It really is. And Luke, while I have you, you did mention that flights are starting between Joburg and Vic Falls soon. Do we have a date for that?
Announced in the last couple of days, I think it's 3rd of December, they will be operating that route initially, I think 3 times a week. And we expect other players to follow shortly after. British Airways Comair, as I said, have announced the date. I think it's around about the middle of December. Not sure of the exact date. But yeah, they're looking to come in on that route as well. And then I mentioned Kenyan Airways. They will be, they are looking to operate their old route, which was Nairobi, Victoria Falls, Cape Town. So that'll be another route back into South Africa.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, well, we don't have any further questions at this stage, but I'm going to jump in here and do a short appeal. As many of you know, ATA is driving a petition here in the UK to open the air bridges between the UK and Africa. Currently, we're in a situation where any returning traveller from Africa must quarantine for 14 days. We also have the issue where the foreign FCDO are currently advising against all non-essential travel to East and Southern Africa and West Africa and North Africa. As such, consumers' standard travel insurance policies are not valid. We do have some policies that do cover, but we need to get this lifted. So we do have a petition that is open for any UK residents. And we are also open petitions from a variety of different countries in East and Southern Africa. So please head to the ATA homepage, atta.travel, follow the link, and there are links to all of the petitions there. And please, please, please sign it, share it far and wide, because we need your help in getting tourism moving again to Africa. So thank you very much. Thank you to everyone that attended. We had a great audience, lots of familiar names, lots of new names. So good to see you, and thank you for taking the time out of your day to attend. To all of our panelists, a big thank you for your insight, for a little journey around Zim. I know for one, I'm itching to get back out to Africa, and Zim is very, very high on my list. With the new KQ flight being relaunched back into the falls, maybe I need to do a little trip down to Kenya, to the falls, and then on down to South Africa. So to everyone, thank you very much. But a big, big thank you to Kirstine and the African Bush Camps team for pulling this whole thing together and giving us the opportunity to facilitate this all for you. So thank you very much, and we'll see you all again soon.
Thanks.
Cheers, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys. Thank you very much.